Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Merci Fernandez Wash Process Peru from Supreme Roastworks. And there's the bag right there. And Supreme Roastworks, based out of Oslo, Norway. And this is part 3 of our 4-part series featuring the Right Roasts June subscription box. And Supreme Roastworks is another Nordic-based coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel exclusively as part of our Cafe Box Advent Calendar series. And just like Jakku, this is our first ever full bag review from this coffee roaster. But unlike Jakku, this is our first time trying any of their wash processed coffees, as all of our previous experiences from this roaster have been with non-washed coffees. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 37. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a recipe we found for Supreme Roastworks, which is a very interesting recipe. It is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 90 degrees Celsius, about 195 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, once again, we do have a Nordic coffee roaster that does roast on the lighter side of things. This one, I would say, is on par with that Jakku coffee in the sense that it is lighter by most standards and metrics. But even then, it's not quite as light as some of the other Nordic-based coffee roasters, and even the one that we have coming up next, the Colfeus Circular coffee. So we will say that maybe a little bit on the slightly more developed side of that light, but still a lighter coffee by most standards and metrics. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and this one we put through the V60, and the cup came out a bit more bright and vibrant than expected, especially for a Peruvian coffee, as it seems to offer a more fruit-forward profile with an abundance of caramelized sweetness on the back end. There was a sweeter start leading to a much more positive first impression, much more so than I thought, so definitely a nice start to this one. Day 17, ran it through the Chemex, and the cup continues to offer a very sweet and vibrant coffee with a near natural process level of vibrancy. That's one of the biggest takeaways I had early on in this coffee, was that it was slightly reminiscent of a natural processed coffee. And given that we've actually never had one of their wash processed coffees, I did find that very interesting, because that lends me to believe that maybe this coffee roaster does seem to prioritize some more vibrancy within their coffees in general, because given that that's been our previous experiences and having a wash processed coffee also skew that way was kind of interesting. It did offer more cleanliness than a natural processed coffee, as it still offered some of the slight washed profile characteristics to this one, but it offered a very strong apricot-like aspect with a little bit more of a caramelized sweetness on the back end. So this second day was very interesting to me just because of how vibrant this coffee continued to be, and while it was still a wash level of cleanliness, it was maybe on the lower side of that. Day 19. The coffee continued to remain pretty consistent, this time through the April brewer, as there was a slightly natural fermenty stone fruit aspect to the cup yet again. So that's why it's been so interesting, because at times I could say this is a little reminiscent of a natural processed coffee in that sense. Very bright yet again, but for the most part, not necessarily the cleanest wash processed coffee we've reviewed. Citric aspect on the back end of this one as well, so not my favorite day through the April brewer either. We continue on to day 22, and it's at this time we adjusted to Supreme Roastworks recipe, and the cup is mostly consistent still, but in a slightly different sense, as this time it felt like it offered a little bit more vibrancy and a little less of the slightly fermenty fruit aspects. So that in itself was an improvement, as the coffee had yet again a near natural processed funkiness to it in terms of the stone fruit aspect, a slight smoky quality as well, and I would even say that there was a slight grape quality too. So this one was very different, and that being said, it was along the lines of the coffees we had experienced earlier, just in a slightly more different sense. Here on day 25, though, we had the best experience we'd had up to this point, as we ran it through the Chemex, and the coffee was notably better and cleaner at this point, as there was a heightened focus on the vibrancy to stone fruits, a little bit more in terms of this jammy sense with a sugary aspect as well. The caramel, smokiness, and slight fermenty qualities have all been minimalized, with the brightness a little bit more present in the finish. So this was significantly better, because it did minimize a lot of those qualities that I hadn't necessarily been enjoying the most up to this point. So props to this adjustment, as it really did seem to yield a lot of positive results. Day 29, back through the V60, and the coffee felt like it had come full circle, as it's the most balanced it's been up to this point, as that slightly fermenty aspect is a little bit more toned down, with the mango aspect being a little bit more sugary, fresh fruit forward, a slightly darker profile to the cup in general, so much better. And the reason I say it came full circle is because at this time, once again, we've just kind of stuck with the recipe that we found for Supreme Roastworks, and it seems to yield better results with both brew methods, especially after the adjustment and a little bit more time. So that definitely did lend itself towards being a more positive experience. Day 32, another try through the Chemex, and it feels like the coffee is just kind of naturally improved with time, with a fair bit of the fermentiness being toned down. I really don't know what to make of that. I've never experienced this level of slightly kind of fermenty aspects within a wash process coffee. So that was interesting, but given that we were able to get rid of that with more time, we were experiencing much more of a focus on the sweeter aspects, the sugary stone fruits yet again, darker candy, slight florality, even a little bit of nuttiness as well. So showing some of its Peruvian characteristics too. Day 34, final notes we have, and very minimal notes because we once again ran out of space. So the coffee is the best it's been up to this point. Here we are on day 37. Coffee continues to improve, vibrant candied fruit in a generally sweet cup. So don't have too much to say on that. Coffee just continues to improve with time. So we will see how it goes from here. But let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have actually a lot of level 4s. So let's start with the cleanliness level 4. That's an interesting one. And the first couple of days I was making this tasting wheel, I was really beginning to wonder whether or not this was going to be one of the few wash process coffees that weren't a Kenyan coffee that was actually going to score a level 3 on that mark. I would say even then it was maybe on the slightly higher side of level 3, and maybe still at the end it's on the lower side of level 4, as it still seems to offer that quality in a very slight manner, maybe not to the extent that it could really take points off of that category, but even then it wasn't necessarily the cleanest wash process coffee we've ever reviewed on this channel. That's one of the biggest takeaways I had from this coffee in general. Finish level 4, even with that being said, it was by no means an overbearing, long-lasting finish to it. It did have a pretty even finish, especially on the later days, so I do like that part of this coffee. Sweetness level 4. Yes, that's one of the first things I noticed when drinking this coffee, was that it did have above average sweetness for a wash process coffee and a Peruvian coffee. So that was pretty consistent throughout, and towards the end I was experiencing a much more defined and well-balanced sweetness to the cup, where at times it may have skewed a little bit more in a direction that I wasn't necessarily enjoying. Acidity, level 4. Once again, that's another interesting thing, because we noted pretty early on that there was a interesting bright aspect to this coffee, and that was another thing that was pretty consistent throughout the entirety of this one, so I feel like that's justified at the level 4. That could be attributed maybe a little bit more to the roast profile of this coffee, but even then, a little bit more brightness than I might have expected for a Peruvian coffee. Stone fruit, level 4. Yes, and I did mention pretty early on that there was that sugary mango aspect. At times, especially at the start, a little bit more in a fermenty sense, but towards the later days, it kind of shaped out well into maybe being a little bit more jammy, a little bit more apricot-like, and towards the end, a little bit more of a kind of defined sugary stone fruit in general. So really liked that part of the coffee. Caramel, level 4. If I do recall correctly, I do believe that they have a caramel note listed on here. Could have been the priming effect. However, I don't necessarily feel that was the case, as it did offer a wonderful candied sweet aspect to it, and there was a darker profile in general throughout the entirety of this one, so I would say that that was an equal to, if not more abundant of a measure, at least at times, in the stone fruit aspect in this one. So I feel like that one's definitely justified at that level 4. We have a couple of level 3s. We'll start with the body, level 3. Interesting that it scored there, mostly due to the fact that this one was brewed with the Chemex, but even then I was feeling a fair bit of texture, enough to the point where I could say a little bit more on the medium-bodied side of things, even with that brew method, so that goes to show that this one had a fair bit of body to it. Florality, level 3. Yes, and I mentioned and alluded to there being a slight floral aspect within this one, and it was a little bit more of a sweet florality to it as well. I feel like that did kind of demonstrate some of the more proven characteristics, as at times I've had some slight florality, floral components that accompanies the chocolate aspects within these South American coffees. So it's another thing experienced in this one. Chocolate level 3. Yes, I could say that this one also demonstrated a fair bit of the South American characteristics by offering that much more kind of soft milk chocolate component to this one. Another persistent quality throughout the time drinking this coffee. Anything else really worth noting? Honestly, looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. It may not necessarily look as overly balanced, but I feel like when you kind of maybe take a step back and see the things that are scoring lower, you can see how this one had maybe a little bit more depth, variety, and just, I don't want to say complexity. It was a pretty straightforward coffee, but just a little bit more depth in general to this coffee. So I like the way that this tasting wheel looks. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I can say that this one was definitely my second favorite of the 4 coffees that we are doing in this series, and the coffee we're reviewing tomorrow is, not surprising, our favorite coffee that we had in this entire series. So that's a testament to Supreme Roastworks. It goes to show that, just like with Jaku, a lot of these Nordic-based coffee roasters, I do enjoy a lot more when I have their wash-processed coffees. So I do hope that next time the advent calendar does roll around, we might be getting some more wash-processed coffees from coffee roasters like this, from coffee roasters like Jaku, because there's just such a stark contrast from my experiences with these coffee roasters when I am trying some more standard coffees instead of the more, we'll say, modern, progressive types of coffees that I don't quite enjoy as much as something that's a little bit more classic like this. This one was both classic and modern in the sense that it offered a lot of these South American characteristics to it at the same time with a little bit more of a modern profile. And as a result, you were getting some wonderful sweet and fruit components to it. And even then, it didn't necessarily offer the greatest clarity, cleanliness, but I think that was balanced out because of just how enjoyable the vibrancy of this one was. So you could look at it one way saying this was a very, very clean, natural processed coffee, or you could say that it was maybe a slightly less clean wash processed coffee at the trade-off of getting a lot of vibrancy that really made me enjoy this coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, it goes in line with what I just mentioned. So if you do like maybe a little bit more vibrant of wash processed coffees, especially skewing in those 2 specific directions, that caramelized sweetness as well as that stone fruit aspect, then this one had both of those in significant abundance. Once again, I do want to harp at that lack of clarity, because even though it did score that level 4, it did take a little bit of time. It did take a little bit of work to kind of get it all the way up there to that mark. So it's not necessarily going to be the cleanest wash processed coffee, but towards the end you are able to experience what I would say is a standard expectation for a wash processed coffee. Or on the other end of things, if you do not mind that and you do enjoy a little bit more vibrancy in your coffee in general, then this is another good place to go with that one. I think that's kind of the best way I can point somebody towards for this one, and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you enjoyed the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Merci Fernandez Wash Process Peru from Supreme Roastworks. Thank you for watching.